Hello again, and thank you for watching. This is another video on the first level of Halo, and I'm hoping we can knock this out in this video or the next one and be ready to get moving into the others. I've got lots of very satisfying talk on the other levels already recorded. I'm very happy with that. If I get this one done to a satisfying level, then I've got lots of this game done, lots of interesting stuff all put together. If I get that into a nice playlist, I'll have lots to share, and that'll make me very happy. So let's get back into it. I'm not going to talk too much about incidental detail. I want to get this moving a bit, but something I just want to point out real quick. There's a board here with little notes on it and their references to movies and such. I think that's very neat. Now look, we get a gun. And here are aliens. They aren't very competent, these particular ones. We killed them. And here's another gun. And time to start killing some things. There's a lot of stuff I want to say about how violence and combat play out in this game. I think it's very good. For the minute, I'm just going to kind of move at the pace of the violence, and I will kind of say things as they come to me. I think I've done a bit in the other levels I've already recorded, but I'll try to get a bit in here as well, just to kind of give you an impression of where I'm coming from. I don't think talk about weapons, sandboxes and such is very enlightening or useful. I think that frankly, we need a whole new vocabulary for talking about the things which video games can do, what it is that makes them feel good, what it is that makes them unique, what it is that makes them stand out from each other, why some should be considered more advanced than others. And that's kind of a recurring point that I'll be bringing up, that this game I consider very advanced, and I really think that even by the late 90s and the early 2000s, a lot of things had basically hit their functional peak in video games, with regressions in the future being covered by very gratuitous and frankly not even aesthetically worth it advances in what we bluntly and crudely call graphics technology. Frankly, just, more polygons and more pixels doesn't make something nicer looking, it doesn't make it more visually complex, and more interesting things were not done with video games. We did not get the future that I thought would be coming when I saw how complex this game was as a kid. And a general thing I'd like to talk about, this was just a fairly elaborate room battle, not too hard, set to normal. People weren't so good at video games when this was new. Normal will look very easy as I play it. But look at these guys, there's 5 of them, they all run around fairly autonomously. And if I were to leave the room with them and the aliens, they would have a rather interesting fight. I can't elaborate too much now because they're all just kind of idling, but I believe that watching these guys in this game is generally much more interesting than, say, how the different moving, supposedly living animated parts of a Call of Duty or whatever fight themselves autonomously. It's really not that well done. As a kind of video game as a living virtual space, Halo is still interesting to look at in a game way which newer games don't really bother to go into. I'll elaborate in just a moment. Let me check something. Yes, pardon that, I was just checking I was recording. What I really like about Halo, a general thought I'll be coming back to, is that Bungie really made, in many different ways, what feels like a more living and active world than most other games. People say that, oh, it's a shooter, but that doesn't really capture the intentions. Halo was actually designed as a strategy game first, and even that didn't really capture the reality of how Bungie made their games, which are called strategy. The idea was very much, no matter what they were doing, to create a very lively and reactive physical space which did things which we call simulator-like now, in a way which also isn't very enlightening. How I put it, the kind of new language I propose, is that it's all very visceral and very high fidelity in terms of how things interact. You might notice me spend a lot of time panning around certain objects just because I think that at this certain level of detail and depth, I'm not saying it was entirely deliberate, it's something the later Halos still did to a decent degree, things feel more three-dimensional. The impression they make, I believe, if they are simpler, because our brain reads them as solid objects rather than a kind of flat projected image. If they are simpler, it's hard to explain, but if something looks blockier, it looks more like a distinct thing existing within the space rather than a perfectly blended part of it. I've heard someone bring up the analogy of layers before, and I think that that's a very useful one. The idea that a virtual space, as it's projected as the 2D image on your screen, it looks like it's composed sort of layers, and a newer game made on something like the Unreal Engine, everything looks very much like, look at this dead guy here, he looks very much like a solid thing I could reach out and touch, and my bullets will hit him. If I hit him, stuff will happen. If I shoot his gun, things will happen. One moment. There we go, it spins. It's very physical, and I think that if he were rendered with more polygons, finer edges, everything finer edges, smoother, things start to look less solid. He looks almost like he's... Certain things in older games look almost like origami blocks. They have kind of the Katamari look. And Katamari is generally a very good example of a three-dimensional game because in addition to looking solid, it's about solid interactions between things. The game is driven by the touching of the simulated touching of three-dimensional objects, and I think that is something that games have very much lost since then, the sense that a virtual world is made out of three-dimensional things, and it's very novel that they touch. You see there, I just walked into him to show that we don't awkwardly blend through each other or anything, even if it's a bit exaggerated. There's very much hard physical space between you and everything else. You are both space-occupying entities within this world, which means you bump into and bounce off of each other in a way which I find very important for creating a visceral sense of action, very much this idea that I am there, they are there, we are both solid. It makes everything feel far more substantial than... If I were editing, I could show you a clip from something like Kane and Lynch 1 now. About 10 years after Halo, around 2011, video games hit a real low point for this where everything is more polygons, more detail, but nothing feels like it's actually touching. Look up any clip from a game of around 2010 or so. Look up some fights from Assassin's Creed. Nothing looks like it has physical mass because basically it's not built on a robust simulating physical space engine. It's very much just entities just kind of float on air. They're like water just phasing into each other, and the touches are simulated, whereas Halo actually models physical rules. And yes, again, it was made for a real-time strategy game originally, the parts of this, and the idea was to simulate battles. It would be more fun if, rather than just things look at each other, bullet animations fly off and health bars go down, you get things like bullets physically moving through space and touching, the flight of a grenade through the air modeled, the body is launched by the grenade's explosion modeled. It's just this idea that it's fun to have stuff actually interact in a substantial way. And I would call that the defining trait of Halo just about, especially compared to games which have succeeded it since then. It's very much a game about hard physical rules, hard physical space, and I very much love that. It's extremely fun. It's about how it feels. It's a kind of texture to the thing. It's a lot of different things we can call it. Again, I might be awkward with my words because, frankly, we don't have words at the moment to quantify the kind of experience and phenomena which I am talking about. You could call this any different number of things, I'm sure, but what's important right now is that I just want it to be appreciated. Call it what you want. I'm sure the moment it becomes a verbal meme, it will stop being appreciated again because that's just the nature of things. But if you watch this and you think like, oh yeah, that's why certain video games feel the way they do, that would make me feel very good. I would very much... The intention here is to help people get more out of things which they are looking at, to serve as a kind of guide in not just understanding this work, but appreciating what makes virtual worlds, video games and such in general pleasing or displeasing, what they can do for us, what they have going on. I want you to appreciate this and video games in general. And again, we're just in a very lively scene. You saw back there some of those Marines with their guns firing over a barricade. You can see they have a fair bit of stuff going on. They roll, they dive, they duck, they shoot into the barricade, unfortunately. But it's 2001, they're trying their best. Be nice to them. we'll see them actually do some fairly impressive stuff later on, if you ask me, and let's be frank, in 2023, can you show me a game where they're doing anything more impressive than that? The most you might have is, I don't even know if Ready or Not has AI as we call them now, but it might, but even then, is it more impressive than what SWAT 3 and 4 were doing around not too long after Halo? Again, video games haven't really gone forward, and this is still very impressive in the sense that it's modeled and these virtual men are trying to think and doing, in my opinion, a good enough job for what this game is doing, and more importantly, they have not been shown up. This game has not aged, as the stupid people put it. Really, I think very few games do age, and the ones that do are ones which do not get accused of it. I could elaborate on that later, I've written on that here and there. But anyway, where I'm going, Halo still feels quite advanced to me because, again, the things which we quantify at the moment I don't consider useful in measuring anything related to how we actually experience the things. The things which Halo does well, we mostly don't have words for, and that makes talking about it difficult. And that's why I think just a kind of open-aired, one-way conversation with me might be very healthy for thinking about games. I just intend to let thoughts run and express things which I think I haven't heard expressed before in a way which makes sense to me and hopefully makes sense to you as well. Again, that's just the point. I think this needs making, so I'm making it. If you don't like it, that would be a bit of a shame to me, but at the same time, not really hurting. If you appreciate it in your own way, that's good. I would only really be upset if you just didn't care and said, it's not worth the attention, because frankly, I think it very much is worth the attention more than a lot of things which get far more than this. And Halo does get attention, but it doesn't get appreciation, which is, again, that word I'll be going back to. You look at it, but do you see it? Do you see all of the nice things it has? Do you get all of the pleasure you could from it? And most importantly, do you see the creative will behind it? Do you understand why it is the way it is? Do you see what they were doing? Can you reach the humanity through what they have created? That is the point of looking at all art, I would say, ultimately. Halo is an affirmation and a collection of... Pardon me, I was just distracted by that achievement pop-up there. Very strange thing. Halo is, like all creative works, a kind of expression and affirmation. You can absolutely read the minds of its creators through it, and I think that that is something which very few people, if any, have actually tried to do. I think Bungie, they were a very unique group of people with very strong character between them. This isn't an auteur work, it's not a Hideo Kojima game, it is not one man's vision. But that's what makes it interesting to me. It's more like reading a kind of zeitgeist and cultural scene. This is a kind of STEM, bleeding edge, cool, smart, nerdy, white and Asian guys of the 90s and early 2000s kind of guy thing. This is like California cool people stuff. Back when nerd was still kind of a genuinely weird and outside thing. Not everyone was some kind of idiot obsessed with virtual media and virtual worlds. This was a kind of outlier thing. It's very much a kind of product of a weird subcultural moment and some very just strikingly cultured and interesting men doing some very good work of the kind which you don't really see anymore. Again, just Bungie, very cool guys. I probably articulate some of this better in episodes which I'm going to put after this one, which I already have recorded. Again, we're just kind of getting through this, having a good time, setting the scene for those later talks. At present, again, if you forgot or didn't hear, I kind of messed up the audio on my first run through this level. I want to have the whole game covered, and I want to have a nice introduction set up for it, so here I am doing this again, and it shouldn't take too much longer now. Now we go into the dark. You might have seen me flipping this torch off and on. It's very handy to have at a moment like this. Just a nice detail that light is very well modeled in this game. It's not something to go on and on about, but a lot of games can't quite get torches to function this well. It's a kind of weird spotlight projected into the distance where the light radiates from where you're aiming. But no, here it's very much from the end of your gun in a way which makes sense. And they even model that when I swing, the light goes left. That's not something that really needs a whole lot of thought. It's just a neat little incidental thing I enjoy pointing out. The game has a lot going for it like that. Again, it's that kind of dedication to feedback and fidelity where, of course, my torch is a physical object attached to my gun, so as my gun swings around, so does the torchlight. Little things like that which you don't think too much about really make it feel more like a physical space which you're inhabiting. Again, it's very much something which I think is lost in your Call of Duty Modern Warfare campaigns, and, you know, don't even bother with the new ones, they're so bad. Yes, very quickly after this, it's not a trait which was preserved because, again, it's hard to quantify, nobody was going to fault you for losing it. It's this sense of 3D physicality, and it's really, in our age of kind of severed tradition and arbitrary and scattered throwbacks, attempting to touch the glory of the past, the indie scenes, the revivals, the boomer shooters, all that other made-up crap which is just idiots pretending to appreciate the past. Nobody really gives off the impression that they appreciated a lot of nice things like this. Like, just this sense of 3D space in a world. You don't even need this to be in a game about shooting things. It's just a nice thing a lot of video games had. You could make any number of games with this kind of 3D physicality. It's just nice. It's not something I see anyone bring up. And for a related thought, not Halo, is I also think that this is a kind of defining trait of a lot of old Japanese games. I think there's a very strong affinity between Bungie and the Japanese for various reasons I might go into later, but Resident Evil is a series I consider very much defined by physicality. Shinji Mikami has a fascination with fine, strange objects, gears, clocks, and so on. I think he collects watches. When he's not doing game stuff, he's that kind of man. And that's something you can do with this kind of appreciation of 3D. Like, yes, all of the men and their guns and bullets are three-dimensional, and that's... look, they even bounce. That's a nice thing to have, but this could be a Shenmue-like game of picking things up and looking at them and just feeling like it's a solid object in your hand. That's a very nice sensation. A lot of people who claim to be interested in games that aren't about shooting, that's a very much a dropped tradition they could pick up if they actually wanted to give a very worthwhile... if they wanted to use video games in a worthwhile way for something other than killing. Tactile sense is something which is... virtual tactile sense, we'll call it for the minute. Something which is not really appreciated or capitalized upon. Again, because we don't have language for it, nobody makes video essays on the subject. If I wanted to basically justify making something in a game which other people might say would be better suited for a movie or a novel, nothing against those either, I like all media. Something I think you can do here which you can't in other things is, again, that physical sense. If Resident Evil were a movie, I would not have the fine sensation of picking up a Beretta 92 FS and looking at it, rotating it in 3 dimensions. If Resident Evil were a book or a novel, I would not be able to physically see how they envisioned every strange small item which plays some bizarre dreamlike role in the Spencer Mansion. I would not be able to look at them and see it through the creator's mind's eye. And the last thought I have, which is a bit more abstract, is that the entire physical space of Spencer Mansion, it has a kind of abstract and dreamlike quality which could be done in any other way, potentially using the tools of film or literature, but as they do it in the video game with kind of strange architecture which you actually physically walk through, strange warbling 3D rendering, extreme color schemes, it could be a surreal film, it could be a surreal novel, but the game experience, the novelty of how nothing like it had come before paired with just the inherent strangeness of the premise, it's really something else. And Halo, I think, has a very similar thing going for it again, where we're walking through this world of wide open spaces, hard lines, rigid corridors. It's very much this tactile sense for the world, which is different to anything else you could do. And Bungie were conscious of this. Remember, they wrote a novel which was to be released possibly slightly before the game, I'd have to check that, but Again, this was a world that they had thought out before they built a game around it, and they had very particular ideas of how this could be realized in one medium and how in another. The novel actually has lots of very nice details which aren't directly represented in this game, and I would actually say that if you appreciate one, you should look at the other. And yes, I would say that it's a very interesting thing to go from a well thought out novel to a well thought out video game, which are attempting to express the same idea, to see better from each angle how what they had in mind is brought to life in a different way depending on the tools at their disposal. And if there's a key kind of idea I want to get across with Halo, it's that they had a very full, very complete idea, and they were very committed to realizing that idea with all of the tools that a video game brings to them. Just like when it was a novel, they used things that would only work within a novel. And Halo really is top to bottom. Every part of this really brilliant game is devoted to that Halo vision. What is that vision? I gave you a bit. It's kind of hard to get out all at once. There's so much I'd like to say, but I hope you've got the edge of this, and I've already recorded this level and the next one. I have a lot to say there, and I hope you find all of that interesting. Thank you for watching up to now. I hope you're interested. I hope you are starting to appreciate this thing as I do, and I hope you'd like to keep watching. Thank you very much.